Welcome to Nightique. I'm Edward St. Pé. Well, think about it, the over-incarceration of persons here in Mississippi. It's a problem. The prison situation is, if you've been following the story that Jerry Mitchell's been doing in the Clarion Ledger for the last few weeks, it's unbelievable when you start to hear the facts. So many people, and nonviolent criminals, being put into the prison system and going into a college of criminality, as it's been said, coming out as experienced bad guys. When they went in, they weren't that bad in the first place. So it's really a mess. And we've got Jerry with us again. We're going to talk to him about his continuing coverage, his investigation of the prison situation here in Mississippi. So we've got the whole show dedicated to that subject tonight. So stay with us. This is Nightique. Jerry Mitchell will be back with us after these messages.
Since 1849, Carter Jewelers has been a part of Jackson's rich history. Over 163 years later, we've not only survived, Carter Jewelers has flourished. From generation to generation, we've established a tradition of excellence. Our reputation is built on customer satisfaction, service, and trust. Every piece of jewelry is hand-picked, so you know you're getting the best value.
Nobody says I do like we do at Carter Jewelers.
Come see us and be part of our history.
Ingalls Shipbuilding is hiring electricians, structural welders, machinists, ship fitters, pipe fitters, and pipe welders in our Pascagoula, Mississippi site. Signing bonuses available for pipe welders only. Positions are union represented. Come build your career with Ingalls Shipbuilding. Go to www.huntingtoningalls.com/careers or call 888-935-1507. Well, welcome back to Nightique. Jerry Mitchell from the Clarion Ledger. Jerry, thank you for coming.
It's good to be here.
Good to have you back again with us.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You have an ongoing series of reports in the Clarion Ledger regarding the crisis in the Mississippi prison system.
Right.
And there are lots of crises going on within the system, not just one crisis. And this, so let's first, let's start off. We have one of the highest rates of incarceration of any state.
Yes, and if Mississippi was a country, we would be one of the highest in the world. We're actually incarcerate more people than China and Russia. This is per capita number, but more than China and Russia combined. If you were to take their two rates and combine them, we're actually quite a bit more than that still.
And the cost to run the system in the state is
$389 million.
So almost $400 million a year.
Yeah.
As far as expenditures within the state government, where does that rank?
Very high. Not as high as if you were to total everything in education, let's say, which would be, you know, K through 12 plus higher ed and those kinds of things. But one of the highest items on the budget, state budget, for sure. So
one question that was posed, do we over-incarcerate here in the state?
Well, obviously, statistically, we do over-incarcerate. I mean, we're far above most states and the United States as a whole. So, yes. I mean, the answer to that is, do we over-incarcerate? Yes.
Why? Why do we do that?
Well, it's a problem not just for us, but for the United States as well. In fact, here's a number on that. The United States, 1/4 of the people who are incarcerated in the entire world are incarcerated in the United States. And the United States only makes up 5% of the world's population. So we obviously, in proportion to our population, are way beyond population in terms of people that we lock up.
So there seems to be an ecosystem that is revolving around incarceration, almost like a business within a government.
Absolutely, and it is. There are a certain amount of private prisons who obviously are operating, but obviously it's the state too. And so it's either way, it's costing taxpayers. And certainly, you know, in terms of the locking people up, at a certain point, what you want to ask is, okay, how is this working? You know what I mean? Are we actually deterring criminals from ever doing this again. And unfortunately, what sometimes happens is it actually causes the opposite, that you make the people worse. Like you send in nonviolent offenders into some of these prison situations where the gangs rule, where you're basically forced to join a gang once you come to prison or for survival or whatever. So you end up, one guy I read about, Tyler Smith, he's just this baby face kind of angelic looking guy. When he came in the door, grand larceny is what they sent him to prison for. 2 years. Before he was 2 months from walking out the door, he ended up carrying out a gang killing. And you see a picture of him now, his face is just covered with tattoos.
So there's a good example of someone who was a nonviolent offender who ended up in the system and was basically, he became a hardened criminal as a result of his exposure to that life.
Obviously so. He was not that way before.
It's amazing. Why are our sentences so tough in the state? Are they tougher than other states?
Well, it was a national push years ago, several decades ago, called 3 strikes and you're outlaw. The belief that, you know, if it was your 3rd time, you ought to get the maximum punishment, whatever that is.
And everybody in the public thought that was a great idea at the time. Right?
Absolutely, and it was touted by politicians, and the public was for it, and everybody was for it. But those things have consequences on the corrections end of things in terms of locking people up. Let's say a person is a drug offender. Well, they have perpetual, let's say, drug offense, say they've got a drug problem. Well, you're locking them up for whatever that maximum is. And so they're there, and they're not going to get out for a very long time.
So if a nonviolent person who was a drug offender, who was addicted to drugs, and he had repeated incidents, and so at 3 strikes, and he would be going up the river forever.
Yeah, for a long, long time. And so what you see in the law that's gotten passed in connection with parole has added to this problem as well. Like, they can't be eligible for parole. The habitual offenders can't be eligible for parole. And they've lumped in other things that you would normally not think of as violent offenses, like burglary of an occupied dwelling is considered a, quote, violent offense from the standpoint of what the law is in terms of those not being eligible for the law.
Burglary is of an occupied dwelling is a violent offense?
According to the law, it is. I find that fascinating. I think arson is another one. Now, obviously, if someone burned down a house and endangered people or killed people, that's another matter. But technically, the charge it involves violence to a house, but it doesn't involve violence to people.
Well, in the article I noticed you mentioned that, of course, people incarcerated in the prison, let's say a felon, they cannot vote.
No.
And usually
they lose their right to
vote.
They
lose their right to vote, and also people who are in prison are usually universally by the public, they're not well liked.
Yeah.
So they don't have any constituency out there backing them up.
No, none.
So it's out the window as far as leniency, because people want to get reelected, and you don't gain any votes by helping or reducing the sentence of a felon, right?
Right. Well, and so there's a tendency, the judges are publicly elected in Mississippi, and that's, I'm not knocking that, but I'm just saying this is a part of the reality of this. So therefore, judges never want to appear soft on crime. I mean, that's kind of the kiss of death, right? So therefore, they may have really tough sentences, what normally maybe you would have handled in a different way. Let's say it's a first-time offender. Are you going to give a maximum sentence? Like burglary has a maximum sentence of 25 years.
So burglary of what? Of a home?
Either one, anything.
25 years.
Is the max.
The max, which a person could get the max.
Or as if the judge says, I think you're a bad guy, even though it's a first offense, I'm going to give you 25 years. They could do that.
So that means 25 years, or does that mean they are up for parole after a certain point?
Well, actually, they're not eligible for parole under the law.
Under the law.
Because there's no distinction now between the occupied and the occupied dwelling and the non-occupied dwelling.
So that means 25 years means 25 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a long time.
when the three-strike, you're out law was instituted, I know a lot of folks thought it was a great thing.
Well, sure, it seems like a great thing. You're saying you've had your chance. We're not going to.
But here's an example of a bad thing, a bad potentiality. If your son has a drug problem and he gets into a problem and he gets arrested, and then maybe it happens again, and maybe somehow another thing, and now suddenly a young person who has no violent history but has this other issue, which now suddenly he is prone to go to the prison.
Right.
And now he gets indoctrinated by more experienced criminals, and he might not even come out alive. And you documented all that in your story about so many parents who've experienced that type of thing. Their son goes in, and then he never comes out.
That's right. Or maybe he comes out, but he's not the same.
Not the same.
I talked to Dr. Mike Whalen, who was a psychologist for years at Parchman State Penitentiary there, and what he said to me was, it hardened me. And I got to go home at night to my family. So, yeah, obviously it does have an effect on those who are behind bars.
I mean, how could it not harden you? How could it not harden anyone to see that?
Absolutely. You see that day in and day out and have to, survive, essentially, in those circumstances.
Well, we were talking about the prison system being sort of a business within government or whatever. The idea of for-profit prisons, that's an interesting concept.
Yeah, it is. And of course, it's a relatively new, in terms of historically, it's a relatively new concept. The idea, we've kind of begun to, what used to be strictly the province of the state, we've begun to kind of farm out to private business, and that's one of them. And obviously, there are a number of critics of private prisons who feel like that, that should be something that's strictly the province of the state.
Well, it's an interesting business to be in, I would imagine. We'll talk about that, about the for-profit prison system, and a lot more after this. Stay with us. So we're talking to Jerry Mitchell from Clarion Ledger. Jerry, for-profit prisons, okay, so they make money through all of the infrastructure development and all the costs related to running a prison. So they
actually the capital cost is paid for. They don't pay for the prisons. They just run them, so to speak.
They run the prisons. So they have a vested interest in keeping the system filled with prisoners.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of, the more they get paid per inmate, they get a per inmate cost. So it is in fact in their financial interest to have the facility full.
Whereas maybe the state, if the state was running it, they might look at it differently.
Absolutely, and obviously it's a matter of cost with them. They would look at it actually from the opposite direction. They would say, well, we want to have fewer inmates because the fewer inmates they have, the less cost they have.
Why does the state want to farm out these things like this?
Well, they are on a cost basis. They appear to be cheaper. Certainly on a per cost inmate, they are cheaper in terms of what we're paying out. But then there are certain things that the state is doing for them, like record keeping and some other things. So. The critics say it's a wash, but I don't know. I mean, I think obviously on a per cost basis they are in fact cheaper. There's no question about that.
The barbaric conditions we've heard about and read about, are those things we've seen in the privately run prisons or in the state prisons or both?
Well, I think conditions are not necessarily that good in the prisons that I've been able to see photographs of or witnessed in terms of seeing them myself. But the ones that have been the worst have been the private prisons that I've seen photographs of. Now, that doesn't mean that state doesn't have something equally bad. It's just a matter of what I've seen.
Those were state prisons?
No, they were private.
They were
prisons.
like the one in central Mississippi?
East Mississippi Correctional Facility is where I've kind of gotten the most photographs, and that's in Meridian. It's a private prison. And then also a number of photographs from Wilkinson County Correctional Facility, which is also a private prison.
So over the last number of years, over the last 3 decades, I was reading that we've had like a 300% increase in the amount of prisoners.
That's right.
How can that possibly be? We haven't had that much of an increase in the population, right?
Right, and or really the crime. It's a matter of the sentences are longer, and
Simple
we're
as
talking
that.
about. Right, we have these habitual offender statutes in Mississippi. They have the one for nonviolent offenders and one for violent offenders. And essentially with the nonviolent offenders, same deal. It's the maximum, whatever, your third time, your third strike, you get the maximum sentence. And with the violent offenders, it's a life sentence.
Oh, is that what it is?
Mm-hmm.
The third strike, then you go for life.
Right, and all you have to have is one violent offense. It doesn't mean you committed a violent offense on your third strike. It means if you had let's say previously you'd been arrested for assault. Let's say you got in a fight with someone and you got arrested for assault. I'm talking about if it has to be a felony, obviously it'd be aggravated assault. So if you had that on your record already and then you get busted for drugs, then you would get life.
So the life sentence would parole be a possibility for that person?
No.
So the third strike, then
You're
that's
good.
it.
You're gone. You're not going anywhere.
For life.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Now, an interesting thing in the article that you did, I think Monday's article sort of correlated the cost for college education for 1 year versus the cost for institutionalizing an inmate, about the same.
Yeah, about the same cost. In fact, college was a little bit cheaper, including meals.
And but it's a different type of education that one's gaining. In
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's the part of it I think that's been kind of eye-opening to me is the kind of education that they are getting behind bars.
And what kind of education are they getting?
Well, once you walk in the door of prison, you have to join a gang. And if you don't join a gang, I mean, there are a lot of consequences. You're going to be beaten up, you're going to be extorted, you're going to be, all these things are going to, and that's why people do join the gangs is preservation, really.
Has this changed throughout the years, or is this something that's new?
It has existed for a long time, but I think it's just gotten worse, and the violence has gotten worse.
And people were able to make weapons in the prison, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, in some of these prisons, they've all got weapons. I think that's kind of interesting. I find the contraband thing kind of fascinating, because it's kind of like if everybody had a gun behind bars, and we know they don't. So they don't have a gun. What do they have? They have these homemade knives.
And these are things that are brought into them, or they're making it from things that
mostly make it on the inside from whatever items they can get. There are some that are smuggled in, but in general, they're made from those.
I saw the sword that somebody was carrying around, a machete, right?
Yeah, it's like a machete. Yeah, that's what's going on. That's what some of those guys are carrying around. They're not just carrying around. I always thought of a shank as being like a little short thing, but no, that thing is like 3 feet long at least.
So are these things hidden from view, or do the guards know that they exist, or do they not know this?
I think it's pretty obvious it's known. I mean, I think it's just like, it's like those searches where they're not really searching you. I think it's one of those kind of deals.
But I mean, wouldn't the system want to go in and check for these types of weapons and take the weapons out of circulation?
They do. I mean, there are some conscientious efforts to go in and get what they call shanks and these knives, and other things like cell phones and other things like that. But in general, it's pretty wide open in certain places.
You know, we talked about the cell phone issue, and so a lot of cell phone activity going on within the prison system. Isn't the technology available today where law enforcement can zero in on phone calls emanating from any particular area?
Yes.
In that way, they could say, hey, let's watch the prison and see what kind of calls are coming out, and then we don't know what's going on over there.
Yeah, I don't know if they have technology to do exactly that, but there's certainly technology to jam the phones. There's also technology to, at least as I've always understood, to listen in. I don't know, that may not be as easy as it sounds.
Well, the NSA is able to seemingly
Yeah, the
track
NSA,
phone.
we should get them involved. They have no problem.
Surely the
doing that.
technology exists to do something like
There
that.
definitely is technology to listen in on phone calls. But what does happen is there's a certain amount of gang activity that takes place through those cell phones. There's no question about that. You know, because they sell drugs on the inside to inmates. I mean, the gangs on the outside essentially bring drugs into the inside to sell to inmates on the inside.
So it's sort of like an economy unto itself.
Absolutely. And you can buy, according to the inmates I've talked to, and I've talked to a bunch of them, you can literally buy anything on the inside. I mean, anything you want. You kind of think of prison as a place where you can't get those kind of things. But for example, and now prisons are non-smoking, tobacco is a huge thing.
So it's non-smoking, but yet they are getting tobacco in, and they're rolling their own cigarettes.
Correct.
So, but where do they smoke these cigarettes if it's...
I know. That's the thing that's baffling to me. It's like as soon as you lit it up, it would seem you'd be known.
You can't smoke a cigarette in the bathroom of the airline.
Exactly.
You would think that they would have a technology that would detect smoking in the prison. I would think.
I don't know. Anyway, but you would think they would figure that out. Yeah.
But tobacco's a big element.
I had a gang leader tell me that he could always get a guard to smuggle it in for him. He said he'd go up to the guard and say, "Hey, little lady, how do you like to make $1,000?" And so, you know, that would, you know, he'd get the guard to smuggle in tobacco, and then he said from $1,000 worth of tobacco, he could, the gang could make 10,000.
Wow. You know, I noticed the figures for drug addiction and alcohol addiction within the prison system, and this is sort of startling. It's 3/4 of all of the inmates are either addicted to drugs or alcohol while they're in there.
Yep.
Now that's startling. I mean, that means 75% of the people in prison are literally doing drugs and they're drinking alcohol while they're in prison.
Of course they are.
But I mean, you would think that, I mean, I would understand if it was 10% or 15 or 20%, but 75% is a bit much, you would think, you know.
Yeah, you would think they wouldn't have access to those things. Like if they go to prison or even jail. I talked to one mom, and this wasn't in the series, but I talked to this one mom whose son was jailed for a drug problem. And she thought, well, good, this is great. You know, this will dry him out, and he won't be able. He could get the drugs just as easily in jail as he could on the street.
You know, this is an impossible question. We're about running out of time, but what can we do? I mean, what can society do to, because so many people that go to prison, they end up worse when they get out.
Right.
I mean, is there any views that are being thrown about that would it be better, a better way?
There's some that the legislature has already passed, and Corrections Commissioner Chris Epps was involved in this effort too. Basically, expand alternative sentences, expand drug courts. I think that drug courts have been successful in Mississippi in terms of getting people who are addicted, you know, instead of sending them off to prison.
Right.
Let's have them work in this really tough program, and if they come out of it, we'll excuse their sentence. So that was kind of the idea behind the drug court.
Okay, Jared, thank you for being with us, and we'd like to have you back again as you continue with this story.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Jerry Mitchell, Clarion Ledger. We'll be back after this.
Since 1849, Carter Jewelers has been a part of Jackson's rich history. Over 163 years later, we've not only survived, Carter Jewelers has flourished. From generation to generation, we've established a tradition of excellence. Our reputation is built on customer satisfaction, service, and trust. Every piece of jewelry is hand-picked, so you know you're getting the best value.
Nobody says I do like we do at Carter Jewelers.
Come see us and be part of our history.
Ingalls Shipbuilding is hiring electricians, structural welders, machinists, ship fitters, pipe fitters, and pipe welders in our Pascagoula, Mississippi site. Signing bonuses available for pipe welders only. Positions are union represented. Come build your career with Ingalls Shipbuilding. Go to www.huntingtoningalls.com/careers or call 888-935-1507.
Well, we've been talking to Jerry Mitchell from Clarion Ledger about the prison story he's been covering, the investigation into the Mississippi prisons. And before we close, I mean, we were talking just at the end there about ideas that might help in lessening our need to send all these folks to the prison system. Maybe there's another way.
Well, I think, as I mentioned, drug courts are one way, alternative sentencing. They can, you kind of provide it, it's a carrot and stick approach. You try to provide some incentive for them for good behaviors. I think those are good alternatives. You hate to see young kids get sent to this. I mean, 17-year-olds sent to horrible places.
That would
so
definitely
violent.
be not a good thing.
Exactly.
For their future.
Because it changes them.
It changes them.
Yeah.
Okay, more to come with Jerry in the near future. Thanks for watching Nightique.